Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning and welcome everybody. I'd first of all like to start by thanking ACE and the organising committee for inviting me to the meeting. It's lovely to be here. My last overseas trip was to Singapore in 2019, which seems quite a long time ago now. I'd also like to acknowledge the Singapore government who provided a valuable support to New Zealand, particularly during the early stages of the COVID pandemic, as we dealt with some very difficult supply chain issues for medicines and devices. The government helped act Singapore as a hub for us to get medicines and devices into New Zealand. So what I was proposing to cover this morning was to talk a little bit about the role of Pharmac, to provide some context, to talk about our funding application process, how we work to deliver better health outcomes, and then discuss a pilot study that we've recently undertaken looking at health outcomes for Mavorite for hepatitis C. So as you probably know, New Zealand is at the bottom of the world. We're quite a small country, similar size to Singapore, with a population of just over 5 million. And it's one of the world's least populated countries for its size. Our indigenous population are our Maori population, and we also have a large Pacific Island population. Both of these groups experience poorer health outcomes than non-Maori, non-Pacific Islanders. And this is one of our key areas of focus, is addressing some of the equity gaps that are seen for Maori and Pacific Island people. Our healthcare system is government funded through general taxation, which means residents receive free or subsidised medical care. A standard charge for a 3-month prescription of medicines is $5. All hospital treatment is free, with a very limited private healthcare market. So this is our statutory objective. Pharmac was founded in 1993, and our role in the New Zealand health system is to decide what medicines and devices are publicly funded. So over the last 29 years, Pharmac has had a significant impact on New Zealand healthcare and is unique amongst many international health central funders as we combine health technology assessment with commercial negotiations and budget management. So all those activities are undertaken by Pharmac. Importantly is that we operate under a fixed budget. Unlike many other jurisdictions, we have a capped fixed budget set by the government each year, and this is decided by the Minister of Health based on recommendations that are put up by Pharmac each year. As with many health systems, healthcare want will always exceed the resources available, so choices need to be made. There are always more demands, and that when we're making spending choices, we need to be sure we're making the best choices. It's not about selecting the cheapest product. We need to look at what is the best product for New Zealanders. And this is why critical appraisal of the literature and health technology assessment is so critical, and how we translate this literature into practice is so important. So this illustrates the Pharmac Model. And as I said, it's important that this is done with a fixed budget. So we manage that budget, and we use competition to improve the efficiency of the budget. Competition produces savings that then can be reinvested in new medicines. Those medicines in turn can help promote further competition, and down the track can then themselves lead to further savings. So our focus is very much on wanting to fund new medicines, and we do this through increased budget allocation by the government or generating savings. So we're always looking to manage our headroom to enable us to fund more new medicines. This shows a simplified version of our funding application process. So most of our applications are received from suppliers, but we do also receive applications from clinicians and from patients and patient groups. We seek clinical advice. We then undertake economic analysis, and then we rank all our proposals in order. And we work down this list of proposals when we have available budget. Once we reach a provisional agreement with the supplier, then we then publicly consult. And this enables us to ensure we have our criteria right, our estimates of population size right, and then a final decision is made by our board. This is the slightly more complicated version. It's not a linear process. Obviously, things move backwards and forwards as clinical advice changes, as pricing changes. Items can be re-ranked on our list of proposals for funding. So getting clinical advice into our decision process is very important, and this helps us translate the literature into practice. Our overarching clinical advisory committee is called PTAC, and they really focus on the critical appraisal of the literature. We then have input from a wide variety of subcommittees. We have over 20 advisory committees, and they provide more specialist clinical advice into these areas. These committees are made up a wide range of health professionals, so GPs, secondary and tertiary care, clinicians, nurses, pharmacists. And as we move into devices, we're having a much broader range of input into our committees. So these committees provide us with the expert clinical advice to assist our assessment of funding applications. They answer specific questions from Pharmac and help us to be aware of issues and concerns that health professionals are dealing with. And where they provide their most valuable advice is actually looking at the literature, the clinical trials, the evidence, and how is this actually going to fit into our healthcare system? How does this apply to our local population? And particularly bearing in mind the equity issues around our Maori and Pacific Island patients, how does this trial evidence work for these patients? Throughout our whole process, our decision-making framework is used. We call this our factors for consideration. This looks at 4 different quadrants. It looks at the health need, the health benefit, the suitability, and cost and savings. And in each quadrant, we're looking at the impact on the patient, the impact on the family and the wider society, and also the impact on the wider health system. So for us, it's not just about looking at the cost effectiveness, the cost savings. We actually want to look at a much broader range of criteria for making our funding decisions. And these factors are applied through the whole process, from the point of looking at clinical advice, all our papers, all our decision-making papers apply the factors for consideration. As far as our assessments go, it's important that we understand each market, and we try and take a long-term view on what might happen in each market. Every proposal is assessed against the counterfactual, and we undertake regular baseline forecasts by product group. We undertake BIAs, the budget impact assessments, and also our cost utility assessments, and we consider all standard factors. So I said at the beginning, our statutory objective is to deliver best health outcomes, and we seek to monitor the outcomes that result from our funding decisions. We want to take evidence and clinical advice and ensure our assessments deliver these best health outcomes through our decision-making process. We've been doing this for many years. However, we haven't always followed up as we would have liked on actually monitoring the impact of our decisions, and actually are we delivering the health outcomes that we want to be delivering. So we decided we would start to look at some of the decisions we had recently made, and the first pilot was looking at the health outcomes gained from funding MAVRET for hepatitis C. So just a bit of background. As you're aware, hepatitis C is an infectious disease mainly affecting the liver. If untreated, patients develop cirrhosis leading to liver failure and/or liver cancer, and they may require hospitalization and liver transplantation. The success of treatment is measured by the sustained virological response, the SVR, against genotypes 1 to 6. In New Zealand, like many countries, the most common genotype is genotype 1, which is in 56% of the population, and genotype 3 makes up 35% of the population, and the rest are made up of genotypes 2, 4, 5, and 6. Oh, sorry. So treatments have been available for quite some time, however, they haven't been very successful. Interferon-based treatment with ribavirin had poor outcomes, many side effects. In July 2016, Vicirapac was funded in New Zealand for genotype 1, and Harvoni was funded for patients with advanced liver disease with any genotype. In February 2019, Mavorette was funded in New Zealand for any genotype and with no prescribing restrictions. Based on the SVR in the literature, we were looking at a 96 to 98% SVR. And we forecast just under 4,500 patients were to be treated from February 19 to June 21. For us, this was a cost-saving decision, and the average untreated patient would require $27,000 of health sector support costs. So we wanted to do an assessment of this decision. This is our application tracker, so this is now available on our website, and it helps clinicians and also patients be able to track where applications are in our process. So as you can see, we received the application for Mavorette in April 2017. We worked through getting the clinical advice, assessed it and ranked it, and then we made the funding decision in December 18 for funding in February 19. Again, throughout the process, we use the factors for consideration, and I'll go through each of those. So health need. Hepatitis C is a progressive disease over many years, and as I said, can result in cirrhosis, liver cancer, and the need for transplantation. At that time, hepatitis C was the most common indication for liver transplant in New Zealand. We observed marginally higher rates of Viekira uptake in Maori, but prevalence data for Maori was unclear. And there were really very few suitable alternative treatments for genotypes 2 to 6. It was also a government priority to reduce transmission of infectious disease and to minimize harm from alcohol and drug dependence. Moving on to the health benefit, PTAC had recommended that the application for AbbVie for the funding of Mavorette be funded with a medium priority, and this was at that time conditional on registration with MedSafe and publication in peer-reviewed medical journals. But they identified a potential cure for up to 21,500 hepatitis C patients, offering significant advantages to continuing reducing the burden of hepatitis C in New Zealand. They also noted that at that stage, Mavorette had been evaluated in 9 phase 2 and phase 3 trials that included more than 2,800 patients. And there was evidence of sustained SVRI up to 12 weeks. But they identified at that point there was a need for longer-term data, in particular the effect on rates of hepatocellular carcinoma, the requirement for liver transplant, and morbidity and mortality. And at that point, treatment-naive, non-cirrhotic patients would make up to 90% of patients in New Zealand. Suitability, so again, this is an important factor we look at. Mavorette is a fixed-dose combination tablet, which includes all components of the treatment, and dosage was once daily with food. This was a much simpler dosage regime than Viekira Pack, which many patients had been struggling with. It was a complex mixture of multiple tablets with different doses in the morning and the evening. PTAC also considered that because Mavorette had fewer drug-drug interactions than Viekira Pack, no monitoring was required and treatment duration was reduced. And the decision was made that we would open list it, so it would be enabled GPs to prescribe it, and we felt this was a better way of reaching a high number of patients. So I said, as the cost of saving, Mavorette was modelled to be both lower cost and more effective than Viekira Pack, and at that point, Viekira Pack was delisted once Mavorette was listed. So significant health system cost offsets would happen, and as I said, an average of $27,000 per model patient lifetime. So we decided to look at the health outcomes. The aims were to quantify the health benefits from the decision to list Mavorette, including the primary benefit of the quality-adjusted life years gained by New Zealanders cured with Mavorette, and the secondary benefits looking at the subsequent anticipated reduction in hospitalizations and the development of more serious liver disease and mortality. We wanted to compare the forecast to the actual treated population, but also break down the demographics into more detail. And we particularly wanted to look at the assessment of inequalities for Maori compared to non-Maori and identification of further inequities that may exist for other populations. We wanted to evaluate any changes in therapy regimes and the need for retreatment, whether there are any other factors such as adherence or interactions that may have impacted successful treatment of patients, whether all patients diagnosed have been treated or can still be identified, and whether the lack of prescribing restrictions had actually been beneficial. So the methodology we identified the known Hep C population in New Zealand based on the draft virtual Hep C register. We identified populations of interest and matched those to the known Hep C population. So this included patients who were with cirrhosis at the time of treatment, who were on or previously had an opioid substitution treatment, or who were in prison or had been in prison since 2018. We tried to determine whether people initiated on Mavorite have completed treatment, and we calculated the treatment rates for all demographics and cohorts. We estimated the QALYs and per patient course for those treated, and what we did was compare those results to the analysis we had done in our initial funding decision paper. We also wanted to forecast the number of remaining Hep C patients seeking treatment and the impact on the Hep C population. So the results. The number of patients treated was 1% higher than projected over the period. The expected average number of QALYs per treated patients was slightly less, so 3.6 versus 4, and this was really due to an older population treated than expected and a higher proportion of males. The pharmaceutical cost is the cost of Mavorite, and our contractual arrangements meant that the treatment cost per patient varies depending on the number of patients treated within a period. Early indications of positive impacts on health system costs. So early indications were that there were reduced hospitalizations and there was a reduction in the number of liver transplants due to hepatitis C. However, there was still a significant untreated patient population, and it estimated that while more than 4,500 patients had been treated, there were still nearly 7,000 patients untreated. What these results show is that there'll be a 23% reduction in the untreated number over the next 10 years, and 50 to 60% of patients are estimated to be currently undiagnosed. The New Zealand government recently launched a Hep C action plan aiming for elimination of hepatitis C by 2030. Obviously, with these rates of treatment, this isn't going to be achievable. So a new campaign has just been launched to encourage testing and treating. I think what's been interesting is that what we've learned through COVID-19 is that the way we deliver healthcare, particularly to marginalised populations, has had to change quite substantially. And now there's much more of a focus of delivering care to patients in their local communities, through our Māori health providers, through pharmacies, and through needle exchange. So this will hopefully help to reach more of those patients who have yet been untested and untreated. So the results, we had a positive uptake in key patient groups, particularly our high-risk groups, people in prison, people on opioid substitution treatment. They're accessing treatment at a higher rate. There is some variation in treatment rate. The general population treated is similar to population of people untreated, and deprivation appears to have little correlation with treatment rates. It's also good to see that age-standardized treatment rates for Māori are close to that of non-Māori. However, lower rates were seen for Pacific and Asian people, and there was some regional variation. And this graph shows the uptake, obviously the huge uptake when it was first listed, and this has gradually dropped off over time. So this was our first pilot, and there are some limitations which need to be acknowledged. We don't know if patients took their medicine. Treatment used data on what was dispensed to patients, so we do not know if patients actually took the treatment as prescribed. For this analysis, we have assumed that if a patient has been dispensed Mavorite, that they have taken it. We do not know if a patient has completed treatment. Again, we have limited data to validate if a patient has completed treatment. Attempts were made to try and develop a method to create an indicator for completion using dispensing data. However, this data was not robust enough to use in this analysis. Further data on quantity dispensed is being sourced that may improve our ability to determine treatment completion. Unfortunately, we do not also know if patients have been cured. The cure is confirmed following the SVR test at 12 weeks. However, we did not have access to these lab tests at that time, so we were unable to confirm cure or not as part of the study. Assuming the cure rates in New Zealand are similar to clinical study, we do not believe this is a fundamental limitation, but obviously in an ideal analysis we would have access to this data. So in conclusion, the actual data closely aligns with the assumptions in the funding decision. The modelling and assumptions underlying the Maverett funding decision were very close to what was observed over the first 22 months since listing. Our analysis shows that the number of people treated, the qualities gained, and cost per patient are in line with what was originally assumed in the analysis that supported the decision. So really what we wanted to show is that we took the literature that was available at that time and we were able to translate that into the health outcomes that we wanted to deliver. Importantly, our high-risk groups are accessing treatment at higher rates than other populations, and this is very important for this patient group. At this stage, there are initial indications of cost savings and hospitalizations expenditure, and there was no evidence in structural treatment inequalities geographically or between ethnic groups. So in summary, this pilot was to assess the health outcomes gained from funding Maverett for Hep C. We wish to expand this pilot and look at more medicines that we've funded to look at the outcomes that result from our funding decisions. And what we really want to be doing going forward is taking the literature, our clinical advice, and our assessment to ensure that we are delivering the best health outcomes. And we have 2 more assessments currently underway. And finally, just for information, there is a lot of information on our website. All the minutes of our clinical advisory meetings are on our website. The application tracker, which I showed you, actually gives an idea of process on applications and where they are on our system. And obviously our schedule is fully listed for both medicines and devices on the website. Thank you.